Greetings, friends, and welcome to Contemplative Light in our world. Before we get started with this fantastic interview, I wanted to mention I do have a book out on Amazon. It's been out for a while. It's called Preparation for Great Light, Recollections of a Christian Mystic. And it's about 6 months I spent living in a silent monastery in the exact process of spiritual awakening that I went through. I'll put a link in the show notes, or you can just look it up on Amazon, Preparation for Great Light by Clint Sabom. I also wanted to mention that Contemplative Light is no longer selling online courses, so we are relying on listener donations, and I'm going to put a link in the bottom of the show notes for listener donations. The other way you can make a donation is just go to our website at contemplativelight.org. And on the very top of the page, there's a little link to make a donation. So anything you can do to help keep these interviews going is greatly appreciated. And without further ado, I will introduce our guest, Christina Donnell. And hello, Christina. It is such an honor to have you on this interview.
Hello, Clint. It's lovely to be here with you. I'm looking forward to enjoying a moment with you.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful attitude to have. I'm looking forward to it as well. So I guess for listeners that may not be familiar with your fantastic work and your fantastic journey, do you want to give a little bit of background about yourself and where you've been, how you've got to be where you are now?
Sure. I am a clinical psychologist, spiritual teacher, born with a mystical temperament. I've trained with the Karo Indians of the high Andes for over 30 years. And oh, by the way, I'm an author. I've written 2 books that are multiple award winners. I don't care so much about the awards, but both books are really about tending our evolving consciousness and moving into unity. So I love that they are getting the recognition they are at this time in the world where we have so much separation and strife. And I actually am getting to interview with you today because I'm writing my 3rd book, so I have the week off. So, and I'd much rather talk with you than be pen to paper. So I might also say that in everything that I have done in 35 years, I'm kind of like a cow that has grazed in the same field for 35 years. And that field is unity consciousness. It's non-dual awareness. And it's non-dual awareness, not from the mind, but from the experience within the body, which is truly a remaking of our human consciousness.
Wow, fantastic. That sounds beautiful. And that is the space, I believe, too, that we all rest in.
Yes, the
So,
contemplative light, right? The contemplative light.
right, absolutely. Hence our name, the contemplative light that glows through all the eternal now, the one moment that is all there is.
Yes.
Mhm. So I have your book out in front of me, Encounters with Living Language, and I was just tremendously impressed by just the poetic, beautiful prose of that, not to mention the channeling you got of the certain channels of divine consciousness, but also just the prose in between. It's marvelously written. It's quite poetic.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's a little rare gem that most people sit down with. And although it's a slim book, it is dense and it's poetic and it transmits in a way that transports the consciousness. And that is what in sitting down to write it, it was designed to do. And I think it has been effective by, the multiple people who have commented, and obviously with a couple of awards. It just won the Silver Nautilus Award.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. My partner at Contemplative Light, Mark Thomas Shaw, his book Dante's Road won the Nautilus Award as well. So
Good. I'm in good company.
yeah, we're in good company here. So do you want to tell listeners a little bit about the book and the great experience you went through over many years?
Yes, this is my second book, Encounters with Living Language, Surrendering to the Power of Words. And in 2012, I had an episode of a very severe episode of yellow fever in the high Andes, where I almost died. I had a near-death experience. And in that near-death experience of, going to the threshold or that liminal place where you're like, yes, I'm ready to move on, I came crashing back down. And I heard, all right, it's sound underneath sound. I heard, I am the living light underneath the word. And you are here to be the mouthpiece for language. And then I had a good 3 months of convalescing after that, just from that episode of yellow fever. And of course, I had no idea what that meant. Even though I'm very mystical in nature, I'm also very pragmatic. And I've always been a lover of language. I've been a lover of poetry. I love how a word can transport consciousness into something that is new in our awareness. And then shortly thereafter, I had 90 what I call illuminations. Some would call them visions. I would call them illuminations that were occasioned by language. And every single one of them, when they came on, the acuity of the nervous system goes very high, the luminosity in the room goes very high, and my conceptual and rational mind receded. It was like it went off the line. And then I experienced in each one, they're all very different, the living word, when we don't conceptualize or rationalize, coming all the way deeply into the body, rooting in the body, and really opening the unboundlessness or our omnipresent nature. It opened my quantum nature. It allowed me to experience 5 living things at once that I was participatory with. And so after 90 of these, all of which, when I had them, I just bulleted them and sent them off to my editor. And I never looked at them again because I couldn't rationalize or understand them. But it was after that 90th one, I'm like, yes, there's a message here that is coming from something greater than me that I need to place in the world. And that message has been, oh yeah, by the way, in the beginning was the word. Actually, in the beginning was silence, and then there was the word. And that the word, just like meditation, just like all of the places that can be in the remaking of consciousness, the word itself can bring us back to that connection to the whole in a way that we are participatory with it rather than just simply being a mind concept. And so the book is about that unfolding, including, all of my treks in the Andes, which really lay the foundation for the book, because the Karo Indians live at 17,000 to 20,000 feet elevation, and they do not live in linear time. They don't have a sense of a self. Language is not primary to them. The sensory system is primary to them. So I think it was a confluence of 30 years of grazing in the same field that brought this book into fruition.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so as far as, well, one quick aside, when you said you'd always been a fan of poetry, I'm suddenly curious what poets you kind of hold in your heart dear.
Well, number one is Rilke. I have read everything that has been transcribed into English by Rilke, including rare letters. He was a prolific letter writer. And I've even read some Spanish translations, but I'm not fluent in Spanish. But I have been deeply moved by Rilke, some will say Rilke, because of his pragmatism, because of his bringing back to the body that we can be connected to all of life within the body without having to go outside of ourselves. But I love Bachelard, I love Valerie, I love Rumi, I love Hafiz, I love Shelley, I love Blake, I love Nietzsche, I love poetry, I love dead poets. Matter of fact, my shelves are mostly dead poets.
Oh, fantastic. A lot of great names you threw out, and I am fans of them all as well. So, I've published poetry in different literary journals, and yeah, Rilke, yeah, his stuff is just incredible. Each line is so densely packed, and I got into him years ago, and it was just like, wow, what kind of consciousness he lives in.
Right, right. Yes, yes, yes. And his ability and he was a deep student of the word and how to place the word on the page in a way that it could transport our consciousness. And that is what I was a deep student of.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, do you want to? I think our listeners might want to hear a little bit more about these illuminations and some of the messages, some of the takeaways, some of the, what came out and stuff.
Yeah, yes, yes. I'll tell you, my very first illumination, actually, which only in looking back can you see there was going to be a progression, actually happened in the early 1990s. And I was with a friend of mine who was a Lakota medicine woman, and her partner, who was a medicine man, had died, and we were doing funeral rites in Montana, of all places. And we came in after being out in nature for a week and visited a cafe. And it was the week that Mother Teresa died and Princess Diana died. And there was at a local church a remembering of Mother Teresa. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go sit in this church and participate in this remembering of Mother Teresa. And I did. I sat in the back. It was quiet. The congregation was quiet. The priest seemed closed in on himself. There was some rippling of something invisible in the church that just put me, full head to toe chills, like something was off in this church. Long story short, the ceremony was what it was. And a young boy, as I'm leaving, came up to me and said, "What did you love most about Mother Teresa?" And I heard myself say, I loved that she knew what wasn't right. And I thought that was the strangest thing because I loved so many things about her work. And then I later met this boy sitting against a tree, and he's all kind of folded up on himself. And I have an exchange with him, and we are just eye to eye having an exchange. And this is my first illumination where all the lucidity increases, a mystical temperament, it happens. All of it increases. I'm fixated on his eyes, but I can see almost eternity through his eyes, and he is fixated too. And suddenly, because now my entire body is singing, I'm aware that the priest has been molesting children and that he's been one of them. In that moment of an illumination of an exchange. And shortly thereafter, his parents came up. We ended the exchange, and about 3 months later, it came out in the news that the priest had been molesting young children. But it was my very first, what I call an illumination, where through conversation, through the word, through the pause, through the silence, underneath the words, where everything returns to and arises, it opens up inside of our sensory system a new capacity, or maybe I would call them latent abilities, where we have direct embodied perception.
Have you, just out of curiosity, have you been able to almost teach others how to do this, or is it more something that feels like a unique calling to you that you just follow alone?
Clint, you are anticipating my third book. Yes, I have spiritual groups in San Francisco, Seattle, Minneapolis, and I, since 2017, have been teaching a meditation series called The Unit of Life, which really takes people through the 3 phases of organic growth to get to a place where you have the unit of experience. And it will be laid out in this third book. So yes, I do think it's teachable. Had you asked me that question a year ago, I'd be like, nope, I don't know how to teach it. But of course, I've been teaching it since 2017, and I have so many students who give direct feedback to actually having the experience, the unit of experience, where you suddenly are participatory with all that is around you. It's like singing through you. And that is a very different non-dual awareness than just being in the mind.
Sure, yeah, that's interesting. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I was anticipating your third book. That's fantastic. So,
Yes, it'll be Timeless Consciousness, and we are just approaching trade publishers now. So the book is about half written,
okay, okay. Well,
but it comes off of a 9-set audio series where these teachings are laid out.
fantastic, fantastic. So, interestingly enough, I've been to Peru myself on one trip, and I stayed in Cusco and then went with my wife to Agua Calientes
Yes,
at the
yes,
base of Machu Picchu.
yes,
And I was struck with the energy there, you know.
absolutely.
It's like another world. I mean, I felt like I was just walking on air the whole time.
As you said, I have full body chills. This is living language where you actually get to be there in that experience, which is again awakening the quantum nature, where it's right here, just through your words. 11,000 feet, Cusco. You went to Aguas Caliente in order to come down in altitude a little bit. And oh my goodness, the ley lines of the earth and its power are extraordinary, especially in Aguas Caliente. And then if you go, higher, 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 you get the real monastic feel of the Caro Indians, who are direct descendants of the Inca, of whom, when you live at 17,000, 18,000 feet, you're above the tree line. They grow 40 varieties of potato. That's it. They have alpaca. And they can be somewhat nomadic, so they come down into the Amazon to get their medicinal herbs, but they are so monastic and truly are the keepers of those lands, the energy lines, humanity remaining connected to these larger continuums of which we are embedded in, and we forget daily that we are embedded in these larger continuums. And the Caro Indians simply tend that connection because they don't see themselves as separate from the earth. They see themselves as organs of the earth.
How 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 did you originally get hooked up with the Cuero Indians?
That's a loaded question. I could say
Okay. Is
I
it
could say I could say serendipitously, but my first book is Transcendent Dreaming, Stepping into Our Human Potential. I'm a lucid dreamer from birth, actually. And I had a dream where I was in Heathrow Airport and four people approached me about taking a box that was 2 feet by 5 feet long back to the United States. Of course, this is pre-COVID. And I'm like, well, I need to see what's in that box before I would even consider taking it back. They opened the clasp on the box, and it is a mummy fully regaled in gold. And at that time, I had no idea who the Caro were. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have no idea who they are. And I'm like, wow, this is a weird dream. This is a really weird dream. I wonder what that was about. And then 3 years later, I have my first experience with, like you, going to Peru, doing spiritual trekking. And I realized when I'm there that the mummy was part of that Incan tradition. Also, 14 years later, the woman of the four people in the dream became my editor for my first two books. This is the quantum world. This is the beauty of the mystery. And 30 years later, I lost my lover. I lost my godchild from the Andes. I've witnessed their culture dying, of which is part of their prophecy. And I've taught Andean shamanism. So I'm thinking the mummy was the symbol from the eternal of your life is going to go in this direction. And of course it did, because as a clinical psychologist who cares more about the soul than Western medicine and medical necessity, I quickly dropped out of corporatized medicine and I started seeking. But it was that transcendent dream that was really the precursor to it's going on now 35 years actually.
Yeah, that's incredible, and I'm just struck by how much synchronicity there is in your
Right?
story. It's just like you were led, you had no choice or something.
Right. And you don't know it until years later. Years later.
Yes, yeah, yes, indeed. So, I don't know. I mean, in a nutshell, what could you say about these illuminations, the message you've spoken of the non-dual consciousness that is everything and anything, no separation, of course, but I mean, there seems more in that because I remember the book, in the book, the incident you did describe about Mother Teresa that you never thought you would say that about she knew what was right or whatever. And so, I mean, it sounds like some of these illuminations kind of were perhaps counterintuitive in a sense.
Well, what's interesting about a mystical temperament, but I might also say part of that mystical temperament is truly coming home to the omnipresent nature of the body, which is then quantum, and then perception is deeply embodied, and you get direct perception that isn't from thought. And so I think in those mystical moments where thought recedes, you might say the damnedest things because you are your own light and field is now shifting into its quantum nature. So you can hear yourself say, something, but you're like, wow, if I were using my rational mind, I would not have said that. And this is the mystery between separation consciousness, linearity, past, present, future, conceptualizing, rationalizing. And then you go up an orbit where your quantum nature is actually being activated, and how you process and what comes through you, it becomes now something very, very different.
Yeah, fantastic. And you've mentioned about the body being so central to this. I mean, it sounds like kind of what some might say an embodied enlightenment.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, because that's really key. I do obviously hear non-dual spiritual teachers talk about it more as spirit or consciousness, but it seems you're really putting the emphasis on the body aspect of it. Could you say a little more about that, maybe?
Yes, yes. I'm glad, Clint, you caught that because I don't know, I've done numerous interviews and people often don't catch it because the body has not been important. But if you just simply think about nature, the photon, atoms, and light, I forget, we have 100 trillion to the 10th, you know, of atoms in our body. The proton, neutron, electron orbit. Here's the extraordinary thing about the electron orbit, which is light, is that it can orbit at any frequency. It drops down into the frequency in which you're everyday living. And then it begins to claim how you move in the world. But that electron orbit, 100 trillion to 9 or 10 in every cell of the body, has the capacity to come home to its true original light, which is omnipresent. And I think mystical experiences give us the feel of that. And they don't last forever because it's the world we live in is actually pretty dense. It's pretty linear, temporal, past, present, future. It's a cultural trance, or what I call the power lines we live under. And so we can have these mystical experiences that open up and unveil what is the capacity of the body. But this is not the mind, this is the body. This is every cell of the body.
Yeah, I'm curious what happens to feelings, to emotions in all of this for you in your own experience. You know, is there kind of a quantum emotion always resting in, you know, that field, or is it like things like anger and sadness and things still kind of come up, but they flow through your body quicker?
Mhm, mhm. It's a beautiful question. Here's the interesting thing in these states, because it's not tied to thought, thought is, I differentiate between feeling and emotion. So emotion, it comes up because it's attached to a belief, which is connected to thought. But feeling is just simply the rivers of light and the flow through us where we experience where we are connected without it being attached to anything. And these states are more like just pure feeling than getting snagged by a belief and then down a rabbit hole of, you know, crescendoing an emotion. I would say all of these states have an equanimity around them with this little pervasive joy where you can feel all of the feelings: solemn, melancholy, joy, ecstasy, and yet there is an equanimity.
Fantastic. And I love the word equanimity. You know, it sounds kind of like the balance point where the yin and yang meet.
Right. It's not from a place of being not attached because you're completely participatory. That is the beauty of the body. It is connected to the underlying whole and is being sung from that underlying connection to the whole. So it's really a deep experience, but it has a beautiful equanimity to it. Matter of fact, when you come out of it, you feel like our everyday world is like eating styrofoam.
Totally, totally. I can definitely relate to that. It's like eating styrofoam. Yeah. And this, you know, sometimes I think of this earth plane that we're in as kind of a purgatorial realm. It's very harsh here in this world.
It is. It is. There is so much suffering, so much disconnection, so much separation. And I mean, Clint, we're in election time. We had COVID, we have two wars going on, but this is not any different than multiple centuries before us as Homo sapien. It's just the new flavor of the day. And we'll evolve or we'll go extinct, right? We went from Homo erectus to Homo sapien. Maybe we go from Homo sapien to Homo luminous without, becoming extinct. I don't know. We get to play that out, but I am definitely here to sow seeds of consciousness that we can remake the consciousness into something greater.
Yeah, sure. That's great. I like the the phrase homo luminous if we can make this shift. I mean, in the midst of all these problems in our world, including all the problems just here in America domestically, I mean, do you really see a kind of, I mean, sorry for the cliche, but do you really see a kind of new age dawning happening for humanity? Or are you kind of just letting the chips fall where they fall?
It's a great question. That's a great question. I love it. I love it. I'm not really in the camp of a new dawning for humanity, but I am a pragmatic farmer of sowing seeds of consciousness. And I think in all of this strife and violence, I live in Minneapolis. In Minneapolis alone, we have 5 violent carjackings a week. Violent. I mean, they're with guns. Violent. I don't I don't see any of that changing anytime soon. But meanwhile, there are these small tributaries of expanded awareness and consciousness that are trying to figure out how to lean into life and being connected to the whole. And these tributaries are growing. That I do know. They are growing. Over 35 years, I'm watching them just slowly grow. I'm a farmer. I just sow those seeds. So I think it's happening simultaneously. And I don't think the old world is going to change. I believe a new world will eventually emerge. When? I'm thinking we might not get to see that before we leave this planet, but we can be lantern holders for what is possible for humanity.
That's excellent. That's excellent. That kind of matches my view of the whole situation too. So yeah, that's great. Good stuff. Yeah, yeah. Another question I'm curious about is obviously with your yellow fever and all these illuminations, have have you since or even currently experienced more physical sickness coming from the depths of these illuminations? I mean, has your health sustained the influx of divine consciousness?
Mhm. In my first book, I was in my 30s with transcendent dreaming and going through a full Kundalini experience. And the book definitely shows that progression. So, having been through that, the illuminations were not difficult. Yellow fever, yes. I had cognitive deficits. I had fainting spells. And interestingly enough, it came on the heels of losing my lover and my godson in the Andes. And I just moved into a place of emptiness, which then expanded this light coming forward through the illuminations. But I think by that time, my body was prepared for it. I'm also an old elite athlete, and I might just say at 61, almost 62, I have no physical malady in my body. I feel embodied, part of the whole, present in a really chaotic world. Do I take care of myself? Yes. Yes. Because well-being requires taking care of ourselves. But do I have any lingering effects from the divine light meeting my own light? No. Now, if you ask me that in my 30s, oh yes, oh yes.
Wow, that's good to hear. You're in a space of such vitality now, you know. I think that kind of gives credence to this whole non-dual consciousness experience.
For however long it lasts, right?
Yes, yes. We never know.
You never
Well,
know.
I've always liked the Zen, how some Zen Buddhists will talk of I don't know mind, you know, resting in not knowing. And other mystics have talked about that too, resting in not knowing, being comfortable with uncertainty.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. I
Yeah.
love that. And when you've had an experience with a mystery that is quantum, you know your mind simply can't make meaning of it. You you have to come down to seriously just the appreciation of wow, the manifestation is extraordinary. The mystery is extraordinary. The light is extraordinary. And that light is, we are made of that light and it wants to awaken.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Before we close out, I guess, do you want to give listeners ways to find you, all the stuff you've got going on, including your books and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, yeah. Probably the best way is to go under our website, ChristinaDonnell.com, because there you can see the audio series, you can order a book, you can go on Amazon and order, you know, the two previous books. Um, but you also can sign up on social media. You can do Instagram, Facebook, and or even follow our Substack account. But the best place is probably the website because it's the it's the central channel to, you know, our voice in the world as winds of change.
Yeah, I noticed that winds of change. What a great phrase. Yeah. Well, if you could briefly stay on after we stop recording, that would be great. But
Okay.
yeah. I mean, any final parting words for the audience?
Hmm. The manifestation of which is why we are all here, no matter what your beliefs or faith are, is the living light inside of us that we take into every day. So may you attune to that light inside of you to be here as your own original signature, as a part of the manifestation, the blessing of our world.
That's beautiful and a beautiful note to end on. And it has been such a joy interviewing you. I certainly recommend your book, Encounters with Living Language. It's just beautifully written. So uh, I will put a link to the site and such in the show notes. But yes, the Encounters with Living Language I've loved. So um, thank you so much, Christina. It's been such an honor.
And thank you, Clint, my dear brother. May we sow seeds of consciousness.
Amen, my dear sister.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All righty. Take care.